And then there was an agreement between the Commission and the Member States. It was said that the Commission should seek to promote issues related to the pharmaceutical industry with regard to sharing intellectual property, particularly when this type of intellectual property was developed with the support of public financing. And this, of course, was the case with the ARN messenger vaccines. So the pharmaceutical leaders have all confirmed that the Commission had in fact not put on the negotiating table this issue of sharing intellectual property. Could you explain why the Commission did not at least try to fulfill this mandate? Secondly, South Africa and India requested a TRIPS waiver on COVID technology as soon as the vaccine inequalities among rich and poor countries this inequality had become so serious that it was equivalent to vaccine apartheid. But why is it that the Commission blocked progress there? So as you can see here, there's a contradiction. You can't talk about shared intellectual property and then allow this blockage to happen when it comes to the TRIPS waivers. Thank you very much.
Ms. Anderson.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would like to comment on the question earlier I raised. Madam Chair, when I asked you why you didn't announce the decision as to why, or the lacking majority, why Mr. Ursula von der Leyen is not going to be invited into this committee, you answered because there was no decision taken. Well, when there was a proposal to invite Ursula von der Leyen in the coordinators meeting and it was put to a vote and it didn't find a majority. So the decision that was taken by the coordinators was not to invite Ursula von der Leyen. I think you should have announced it, but since you didn't, I'll let it slide.
I didn't see you in the coordinators meeting, Mrs. Anderson, so I don't think it's up to you to make the conclusions. Can you please raise the question to Mr. Schinas?
I just said I'll let it go because I will continue with my time now. I just wanted to clarify, decision taken is decision taken. Anyways, thank you so much for being here. According to your answers, Mr. Schinas, to EU Parliament when before you were appointed to the EU Commission, I could read you strongly believe in accountability, and you were always very conscious of taxpayers' money. Now, Ursula von der Leyen is suspected to have circumvented proper procedure when negotiating mRNA injection contracts. She refuses to disclose text messages exchanged between her and CEO Pfizer Bourla, and she may very well have squandered billions of taxpayers' money. Will you stand by your strong belief in accountability, and will you recommend to Ursula von der Leyen to appear in this committee and to answer the people's questions? And I would further more like to know, what are your thoughts on Ursula von der Leyen's behavior, which I, quite frankly, find to be a reflection of her contempt for the people? Thank you.
Just to clarify, also for all the other members that were not in the coordinators meeting, we took a decision to ask for the documents that were mentioned in the ECA report and to write a letter to Mrs. Ursula von der Leyen. I write a letter to Mrs. Metsola, to write a letter to Mrs. Ursula von der Leyen. And we did not take a decision whether or not to invite her because we will take that up at a later stage. And I think even if we want to invite her, it's better to do that at a later stage. And that was what the majority in the coordinators decided.
Thank you so much. So noted.
Thank you. Mr. Schinas.
Thank you. Thank you for these questions. Let's take them by order. Mrs. Trainer-Noir raises, of course, the issue of liability, which we all have discussed many times in the past. I think that the Commission emphasizes that our approach to third-party liability and indemnification, compensation ensured the rights of our citizens, and that we also made clear that legal liability stays with pharmaceutical companies in all cases. However, due to the specificity of the pandemic conditions, Member States accepted to share some of the financial risks taken by the companies. And we have noted that the European Court of Auditor points to a different approach in the US Preparedness Act that totally shields the pharmaceutical companies from litigation. In a joint meeting recently on the 13th of October, the member of the Court of Auditors confirmed and welcomed that the Commission has not compromised on the protection of citizens' rights and has always ensured that the provisions of the Product Safety Directive are respected. Now, on your basic, I would say, broader question of vaccines procurement, and probably you would allow me, Chair, this is a more political statement. I am fully convinced that this has been a small European miracle, or a great European success story, if you like. One that probably has not been analyzed enough, one that has not been defended enough, but one that has been felt as such by Europeans. And I think, at least I speak for myself and the Commission and my colleagues, that this is not a small thing for a European Union to achieve under a constitutional and legal environment which is known on health policy. Under these circumstances, the European Union designed, implemented the biggest program of vaccination in the history of mankind. And we were able to deliver for all Europeans, regardless of their place of residence or socioeconomic condition. And I think this is something, this European success story is something that we should collectively be aware of when we discuss these issues. Madame Rivasi mentions also, we have discussed many times in the contact group, the issue of intellectual property. You know, I think I have explained that as well at the time, that the European Union has always been central in the discussions on a WTO response to the pandemic from the start. In June last year, also as a result of our exchanges in the contact group, we have put forward in the WTO a comprehensive approach in relation to trade and health, which included elements such as trade facilitating measures, improved transparency, restraint from export restrictions. And for the Commission, I think it is very clear that we do believe that intellectual property is part of the solution as regards access to vaccines, because of the role it plays as an incentive for innovation and development of new vaccine, but also as a way of helping developing countries. And let us not forget, when it comes to the global European response, that the European Union, by far, is the world champion of exports of vaccines. We exported 2.55 billion doses of vaccines. Nobody else
Sorry,
matched.
Mr. Schinas, this is not the question, that.
I haven't concluded my answer. I'm still in the middle of my reply. Je suis en train d'évolution. J'ai encore des choses à dire. So
I've still got something to add.
that one should not forget that the issue of intellectual property is part of a whole galaxy of measures that the European Union did activate and still activate to lead the global response. And we did that not only with the exports, the number of 2.55 billion export vaccines from Europe, it's also a number that should make us proud. And I haven't seen that number circulating enough in the European public space. I have seen the arguments pointing to the contrary, but I haven't seen anyone saying that we exported 2.55 billion to the world. On Africa, we were also key in the COVAX facility. Through COVAX, we helped to deliver 1.7 doses through COVAX to 146 countries, Africa and beyond. And this is probably the last thing I would like to reply to Madame Rivasi, is that we are happy and satisfied that the mechanism that it was finally agreed at the 12th WTO Ministerial Conference in June this year backs and clarifies the already existing legal framework of the WTO, the TRIPS agreement, with the objective to ensure a fair and broad access to vaccines. On Mrs. Anderson, yes, I stand by all pledges that I made in my hearing in the European Parliament. I assumed it with a certain pride and satisfaction. I also hold the Commission record for the longest parliamentary hearing in EU history. Mine lasted for 3 hours and a half. I remember very well what I said, and yes, I did say that we will prioritize all issues of transparency to this House and the respect of taxpayers' money. You are asking me on a number of transmission of confidential information to this House, which is being done under the very specific provisions of the Framework Agreement for transmitting this kind of information to this Parliament. I stand by this process. I will do everything in my powers to make sure that this House benefits from the biggest number of information and data. On the specific question concerning the President, of course, the President, when she comes, will explain her way of seeing this, but I can tell you that nobody can negotiate the complexity of these contracts by SMS or alone. This was a procedure that was very well structured, Commission, Member States, a steering committee, rounds and rounds of negotiation, back to the Member States, back to the steering committee. So the idea of someone alone improvised with a telephone, the complexity of these negotiations, I think, would have to be seen in the light of the very specific institutional and organizational arrangements that we set in place and which I'm sure my colleague Stella Kyriakidis had a chance to explain to your committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President of the Commission. That's why it is very important that we do get access to these documents, as we have requested them. Mr. Teres.
Thank you so much. Safe and effective. This is what we were told by the European Commission in many hearings, as in the plenary of the European Parliament, to pass the digital green certificate because people will be safe and the transmission of the virus will be stopped. We find out now, after a year and a half, that all of that information was false, because these injections are not stopping the transmission of the virus, as the Pfizer representative acknowledged and as Pfizer acknowledged in multiple answers to the media, and as the representative of the European Commission acknowledged in this committee on October the 13th. So the first question that I have to is the following. According to the report from the Court of Auditors, the European Commission, under the leadership of Ursula von der Leyen, purchased 4.6 billion doses of vaccines for 71 billion euros. So if these injections were effective, why she purchased that many doses of vaccines? In other words, 10 doses of vaccines for every human being living in the EU. Second question is about transparency. The issue of contracts. You were mentioning the issue of liabilities and indemnity, and these companies might be liable for some of the side effects. When are you going to fully publish these contracts? Because you guys talk about them, but we haven't seen them. Nobody in the parliament saw the full version of these contracts, and I think for the people it's important that at least someone else besides you guys from the Commission have access to these contracts. Final question. What do you have to say to people who trusted the statement made by the European Commission and by Ursula von der Leyen that these vaccines are safe and now they have severe adverse effects? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Montserrat.
Thank you very much. I'm going to speak in Spanish. Muchísimas gracias,
Thank you very much, Vice President. Thank you. We've seen from the pandemic that no one country can solve these problems on their own when it's a global problem. So there are political issues. The links between safety, security and health have been highlighted. So we have seen the actions of the EU, including our external actions. So we have identified weaknesses, including structural weaknesses in our production capacity within the EU, including for vaccines. And so, looking at the report, there are two things that worry me. If we're looking ahead to how we can improve our performance, I think we have to recognise that we were slow to encourage research and production within the EU, and so that involves the reindustrialisation of our continent. There is a lot of manufacturing industry in Europe, so Made in Europe brand that we should be encouraging. We should reduce bureaucracy for those companies. We should be getting them involved behind this flag of security and health. And then secondly, we're aware that there are lots of cyber attacks on hospitals. There are 3 hospitals in my city of Barcelona in one day. And we've had 3,000 cyber attacks in hospitals and other health infrastructures. So we need to look at security, and we need to deal with cyber attacks. But rather than dealing with each one individually, we need to think about epidemics as being an attack on our biological networks, which has a harmful effect on our patients and on our citizens. So we need to make the links between health and security, but we also have to encourage research and development and production, and we also need to think about security as a holistic approach. We need to make sure that we really are safe from biological attacks, but also from other kind of attacks. And I just appreciate hearing how the Commission is proceeding.
Yeah, thank you very much, dear Commission Vice President. Your job is to ensure the European way of life. And for me, this includes both. Like, on one hand, common procurement, and how we can make a good deal as European Union on one hand, and on the other hand, to ensure transparency, to allow us as a parliament to scrutinise the work the Commission has done. And I believe this needs certain rules, because for the future we have to go for a lot of common procurements. I'm convinced of that. The problem is that both goals, common procurement and good deals, and to ensure transparency, sometimes is contradictory. Because manufacturers, for example, don't want to publish the price the European Union wants to pay or has to pay for a dose of vaccines, for example. And, you know, on one hand, I can understand the position of the Parliament, of us members of Parliament. On the other hand, I can some sort of understand why the manufacturers don't want to publish these figures, because otherwise somebody else would come and say, hey, my deal has to be at least as good as the deal of the European Union. And for future procurements, we have to work on certain rules. We can tackle all those questions like on IP rights, we have been the bottlenecks and so on, but also the price transparency. And so I was thinking about that. What do you think about my idea that in the current situation of common procurement, it is okay, maybe not to publish the price immediately, but after, maybe, let's talk about it, maybe after half a year or a year, the price has to be published so that we as members of parliament can scrutinize the work the Commission has done. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and give the floor to Mrs. Paulus. And then you can answer the questions. Fine, that's the last question.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, for being here. And my question goes again to the global health strategy, because I believe that the EU should take a very prominent role on negotiating this health strategy and also taking into account that, as you said, we are one of the largest exporter economic blocks, which is, of course, due to the fact that we have a lot of production capacity. So related to our production capacity, it might look differently, but I don't have the numbers on that. But how do you see the EU's role when it comes to a fair distribution of vaccines, not only for COVID, of course, but also for other health threats? And second question, in the global health strategy, we should also look at prevention of pandemics, because vaccines are great when you already have the threat imminent, but how would we prevent pandemics to come upon us? And therefore, I would like to hear your view on the IPBES workshop report that we might be on the threshold of entering the age of pandemics due to the destruction of wilderness and putting ever more pressure, because there we have a lot of zoonotic diseases which are just waiting to spread over to humans. And I would like to know, how do you plan to implement the One Health approach into the global health strategy? Thank you.
I'd love to give you the floor, Mrs. But I don't have any time for Catch the Eye. In the next rounds, we have an hour and a half, and I have to, for the final answers, please.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for the richness of this debate and the quality contributions. I really appreciate this exchange, and I want to assure you once again that your concerns and your views will be reflected not only in the two specific initiatives that we're preparing for the 30th of November, but also in the planning and design of our EU Health Union. I was a COVID patient a couple of months before the vaccines were authorized. I spent a week in hospital. I was taken away from home in an ambulance, surrounded by astronauts type looking auxiliary staff. I lost conscience for a couple of days. And the only thing that kept me hopeful was that the vaccines are approaching. And since then, no severe cases have, at least for people of my age group, have been detected precisely because the vaccines were meant to be not a barrier also against transmission, but also a barrier against serious illness, against hospitalization, and vaccines are safe, are efficient, and are working. And those who would like to isolate this discussion only in terms of transmission, I think are missing the overall point, and the fact that our health systems in the European Union are now able to cope. It's also as a result of our capacity to develop vaccines and therapeutics for the population at large. Your second question is, why did we order so many? Can I take you back to the pre-vaccine era of Europe? We were on a global, total confinement. We had 400 million confined in their homes. We had paralyzed social and economic life. And we were expecting the vaccines to be able to take our lives back. And how many vaccines do you order in this political situation? How many of the 400 million confined Europeans can be left out of the vaccination program? How many would you order? Well, I think, yes, I think I shouldn't ask. I apologize. But what I'm trying, what I'm trying to tell you in goodwill is precisely that we ordered so many because we were very clear in discussions with our member states and the people who were in the know, our epidemiological advisors, and they were from the very early stage, pushing us for a global, universal coverage. And even when vaccines were authorized and started coming out, then we were also under pressure that it was not enough and it was not too fast. So one day I think the history of how this program evolved will be written, but I can assure you that this question of universal coverage was not a caprice, was not something that someone thought of like that, but it was the result of very sustained organic discussions with our epidemiological advisors and our member states. On the contracts, I think I have already replied. I fully agree that the Parliament has to be given access to the transparency, according to the access to the framework agreement on the transmission of confidential information, of course, preserving the commercial element of many of these contracts, although I must say that the European Court of Auditors has the possibility and the obligation to audit fully these contracts, and the new president has publicly stated that he had in his possession everything that he needed to ensure a full audit, which I'm sure will also be shared with the Parliament. Now, on Mrs. Montserrat's question, I think she very rightly points to an issue which I like to call resilience. As a result of what happened to us, one of the main reasons is how we build resilience. It took us a pandemic to realize that we do not manufacture masks, ventilators in the European Union, that our raw materials for the pharmaceutical industry are made in India or in China. And this call for resilience, this is the term I prefer to use instead, the strategic autonomy. The resilience of our system is something that we need. That's why we built HERA. That's why we built a manufacturing capacity. That's why we are reviewing our pharmaceutical legislation. On the specific issue of cyber threat, cyber attacks, you are very right in pointing it out as a new problem for health, because the hackers, the cyber criminals, are now targeting our health systems as a priority for one very simple reason, because there is an enormous amount of data being easily located into our health systems, and the banking sector and the financial services are becoming better and better in defending themselves, whereas our national health systems do not consider this part of their job as core duty. So now they're building their buffers. So we are working now together with the Parliament and the Council to build this Cybersecurity Act. We have a fantastic agreement thanks to the work of this Parliament, but also to the French presidency on the Network Information System 2, NIS 2 directive that builds additional coverage for cybersecurity. And I'm confident that by building these blocks of resilience, we will complement our health policy beyond the traditional remit of pharmaceuticals, vaccines, and therapeutics. Now, on the question of later access to the price, I think the question is not that much a question of timing, but it's also a question of confidentiality of commercial information. This is the heart of the matter. Why? Because you said it yourself. Because these are companies, and we manage taxpayers' money. We have a stake, an interest, not to let everybody know how much we are willing to pay, because that automatically sets a market of expectations, a threshold of expectations that in the long run goes against the proper use of public taxpayers' money. So it has to be very careful to consider, to gauge what would be the best political moment for full transparency. But this does not preclude from the European Court of Auditors, which is our auditing house, to have everything they need to ensure that your fears, in a way, or doubts are addressed. So we have to establish this equilibrium. Finally, on the question on the overall role of Europe in the global health policy, I think you are right when you say that this will not be the result of one single intervention. It's not, and I have the fullest of respect of those who say that vaccines diplomacy would be key. It's important, but not key. It does not work with an image of Europe that is signing a check or providing a box or showing our flag. It has to be seen as an ecosystem of a Europe of health that is at the heart of the global response. And this is, I think, something, I repeat what I said earlier, that more and more people say. Talk to the Director General of the WHO, who is not European. He would tell you, Europe honored, the European Union honored Europe by what you did. So we are being perceived now as this global player of good, but we need to be able to do it intelligently, addressing different subjects. And that's precisely the added value of the global health strategy. Not one, but all the issues that have a relevance to our positioning in the world of ensuring global health policy. And I would be delighted, Madam Chair, if you would invite us, together with High Representative Vice President Josep Borrell or with Jutta, to come again and present after the 30th of November both the first preparedness report and the global health strategy. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Schinas, for being here, taking the time, openly answer all these questions. And I think, as I said, on transparency, both of the documents and on pricing, different issues, but it's important that these documents, that we can receive them. I agree, I have to say, with the fact that Europe did an amazing thing in authorizing purchasing and ramping up production of the vaccines, but it is also important that we have full clarity on all these issues. That I think is the right of the European Parliament representing the people. On the pricing, I think we will have difficult discussions also amongst the political groups how to look at these issues on the future, but that there is a need of transparency over there as well. I think you can recognize that also in the questions that you see here. Looking very much forward to the global health strategy, and we'll see how we organize ourselves to get into that as well. And in any case, we'll take it on board in the report. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you. Okay, dear colleagues, let's go to point 5, to our next hearing, and that is a hearing with Dr. Ciro Hukarte of the Pan-American Health Organization, PAHO, and Dr. Sueri Moon, Co-Director, Global Health Center, Graduate Institute of International and Development Studies. Very happy to have them both online, and I hope that is all